PTSD being post-traumatic stress
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Let me read to you, if I may, the
Sure.
definition of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, from the American Psychiatric Association.
Okay.
The condition of a person who experienced, witnessed, or was confronted with an event or events that involved actual or threatened death or serious injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of self or others. That's important, of others, because in the military you form a bond between those in a unit that is stronger in many cases than family bonds. That person's response involves intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Now, statistics show that probably close to 80 to 90% of active military in Iraq, at least, and certainly in Afghanistan, are exposed to enemy gunfire.
Right.
And they are threatened with death or serious injury. And because of that, they feel helpless to do anything about it. And the things that they see, the horrible, horrible things they see, affect them in such a way that they end up with post-traumatic stress disorder. And on top of that, we're finding that there's at least 30% of those returning who are so afflicted, and maybe a lot more.
In what ways are they disabled in their daily lives by this malady?
The symptoms involved most often things such as depression, sensitivity to crowds, reaction to loud noises, a need for excitement, a need for altered states, so they often drink or abuse drugs. Those are the common symptoms that we see.
In addition, we've seen with some of the vets that we've talked to that even if they didn't feel that there was constant personal threat, witnessing the deaths of civilians, the deaths of their buddies, their combat buddies, has so traumatized them that when they come back, they either want to rejoin the team that they were on because home no longer feels to be a natural place for them, or they feel so guilty about things they've done, things they've witnessed, or the fact that they've survived.
Survivor's guilt, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Well, you also start, you also have a, where you create a, you call it a survival, not instinct, but a survival tool, and such as not being around crowds. I mean, those are things that I suffered from when I came back.
Right.
You didn't want to be around a crowd because that's typically where bombs would go off. There were other things that you just, loud noises. I came back to an earthquake, and the first thing I did was roll out of the floor and hit the bed, roll out of the bed and hit the floor.
Right.
And my father came in and laughed at me, thinking that it was funny, didn't understand why I was on the floor. So there's certain tools that you're for
Coping
survival,
mechanisms,
right, that you take in, and those stay with you.
David, this is an insidious disease. Let me tell you, we know people very closely who have suffered for decades without knowing actually that they had PTSD. The toll it takes in joblessness and homelessness and alcoholism and drug abuse, and my saying has always been, pay me now or pay me later, but if you pay me later, you're going to pay me a lot more. Right. The bottom line is, and I'm so convinced of this, I can't express it more firmly, we have to help these men and women, because if we don't help them now, the social services cost, both in dollars and in pain, is going to be astronomical in the coming
hospitals, prisons, dealing with these, and it really seems to be an expendability issue. In spite of the conservatives who claim to support the troops, when what they mean is support the mission that their conservative commander in chief has designated, it seems to me that in a lot of cases, both on the field and when returning home, these people are treated almost as expendable and just thrown away. How do we help, and since it's only less than 1% of the population, how do we help raise the consciousness about this, both among liberals and conservatives?
I think getting veterans involved is something, and it doesn't have to be on a political basis either.
Right.
There are a lot of issues, and if the veterans don't get involved, then who is? And they've got to get off their bar stool, they've got to get off the couch, and they've got to get physically involved in it. And there's many ways to do that, but they are the ones, I think, that need to lead the charge.
And consciousness is raising. The recent events at Fort Hood, there are many who say that Hassan was not suffering from PTSD, but I tend to disagree with that, even though he may have not been exposed to the same kind of horrors that a combat vet had suffered. He was in direct contact with people who had and heard things that no one should hear. But on top of that, as more people are educated as to what PTSD is and what it can do to us, the more they become aware that even if at 1%, that 1% leverages costs and pain far beyond that small part.
And something we're not taking into consideration right now is the fact that the majority of vets are still in Afghanistan and Iraq. If and when these occupations end and they all come home, and we are faced with the tally of what it's going to cost in terms of social issues as well as medical costs to treat them the way they should be treated with regard to their physical maladies, job creation, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, I can't really wrap my brain around what that dollar amount would be. And it's going to happen eventually.
A lot of it has to do with getting the right treatment. I mean, this is not an easy task. You just don't take someone who has PTSD and sit them down across from a therapist and say, okay, talk and you'll be better.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It takes skill, it takes effectiveness, it takes someone who knows how to do this, but in my opinion, ineffective counseling is even better than no counseling.
Right. Now, the government has known about this problem for a long time. It wasn't always called PTSD. It was called shell shock or even unkinder terms. Or
in Vietnam, it's called post-Vietnam syndrome.
Right.
And Vietnam Veterans Against the War in 1970, they were the first group to create what they called RAP groups. And this was from one combat veteran to another combat veteran working on the issues. Oftentimes that is a problem with returning Iraq veterans and Afghanistan veterans now that suffer from PTSD, is you can't just take anybody and sit them across the table with that person. It has to be somebody that understands what they've gone through, or they're going to reject it.
So why has the government been so slow to address this issue? Certainly we spend lots of money on lots of different things, and it would seem that in a country that has such a theoretically high respect for its troops, that this is something that we could prioritize and fund. Why has that not been happening?